And we've seen Christian McCaffrey be an absolute stud on a terrible offense. We saw it last year with DeAndre Swift. And I think that when you look at Travis Etienne's profile, he fits in right in with those guys. And regardless of how well the Jacksonville Jaguars do, Travis Etienne is still going to be a very good fantasy football asset. We're walking through the graveyard and taking different pictures. We passed what was one of the oldest schools in America. And I took a picture of the school and didn't think anything twice of it. And then we come home from the trip. And once I get these pictures developed, and this was a disposable camera, one of those yellow Kodak cameras, when we got the pictures developed, there were little orbs in all of the pictures.
Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of Playernormal Activity. Thanks for joining us again. I am your host, Kraig Dave, and with me today, we have a very special guest. We have Dave Kluge. He is the advertising director, staff writer for Football Guys. He does all sorts of stuff over there. He hosts shows that you can find on YouTube, podcast form, The Launchpad. He does the Football Guys Mailbag show, and I know they're having a couple of those even in the off season here. He also is on Twitter, of course. You can find him at Dave Kluge. That's Kluge. For those of you not watching, he's on TikTok too. He's taken the jump that I have not had the nerve to do thus far. That's at footballguys_Dave. You can find him there, giving you content if you prefer TikTok. Dave, thank you for coming on and joining me today. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. And you mentioned the TikTok. I could not possibly feel more out of my element on TikTok. Twitter makes sense for me. I like putting things out there in words, giving a chance to look over things and review them before you tweet them out. But TikTok, it's the Wild West. I have no idea what I'm doing over there, but I am trying my best. So thank you for shouting that out.
Yeah, it's fun. And TikTok and Twitter have two distinct, generally different crowds, but you're doing both really well. And a lot of people love that video content. So keep doing it.
Yeah, typically I like to keep my social media very compartmentalized. And I think I've talked about this before, but I like really just having Twitter for fantasy football and then all of my other social media outlets for everything else. And now that I've been doing this for a few years, it is all slowly starting to bleed into one big mess of fantasy sports that I can't get away from.
However you can reach people, that's what's important in the industry, and you're doing a great job of it. So we appreciate you and appreciate having you on the show here today. And we're going to be talking about someone you chose, and I found it really interesting because it's a guy that we really just don't know a whole lot about in terms of the NFL. It's Jaguars running back Travis Etienne, who now we're recording this before the 2022 NFL draft. Not expecting him to do anything too crazy in terms of running backs because they did just take him first last year, they took him with their second pick of the first round, 25th overall. What intrigues you about Travis Etienne going into the season?
Well, really, my take on Travis Etienne isn't so much about his profile as an athlete. And we know he's a very good athlete. The last time he played in the NCAA, he was second in the league in receptions. He was number 1 in receiving yards. We know what this guy can do already. And we talked about it a lot last offseason during draft season, so I'm not going to get into that. Basically, what my take is betting on modern medicine more than anything else. When you hear Lisfranc surgery, everybody immediately gets scared. It is just a buzzword that you don't want to hear, is that this guy suffered a Lisfranc surgery. And then when you hear, or a Lisfranc injury, and then when you hear surgery, it's even a bigger thing to get concerned about. So I just want to look at the history of Lisfranc injuries really quickly. And we've seen a lot of guys where it has been a death sentence. Santonio Holmes, Maurice Jones-Drew, Darren McFadden, Cedric Benson, Ronnie Brown, Ted Ginn Jr., Jake Locker. Their careers were completely derailed after this injury. And then we've seen other guys, Brian Westbrook, Dwight Freeney, Jonathan Allen, Le'Veon Bell, and then most recently Joe Mixon, able to come back 100% after these injuries. Now, when you look at the injuries that required surgeries, there is a much smaller sample size. And the two main guys in recent history that jump out to me are Julio Jones and Marquise Brown. Both of them happened very earlier in their career. Julio Jones was just a few years into his career, and Marquise Brown was actually prior to being drafted, coming straight out of college. Both of these guys had surgery to repair their Lisfranc fracture. Julio Jones bounced back the very next season and went for over 1,400 yards and did that for 5 straight years. Marquise Brown got off to a little bit of a slow start as a rookie, but he looks like a promising superstar right now. So really what I'm getting at is it wasn't that long ago that an ACL was a death sentence for a football player. Yep. And then an Achilles was a death sentence for a football player. And now we still have that same mindset when it comes to Lisfranc injuries. And I think that we haven't really adapted to see that players can rebound from this yet. He hasn't gotten anywhere near what his price was going into the 2021 season pre-injury. And I don't think that there's any reason that he shouldn't be valued the same way that he was pre-injury.
Yeah, you're seeing his value being all over the board. I was taking a look at where you have him in terms of redraft. You had him as RB15, I think. Dynasty-wise, looking over at footballguys.com too. The average is around RB16, but that's from 11 to 25. People are all over the board with him. And I think that injury does scare him off. And if you're talking about before James Robinson got injured, I could probably understand a little bit more hesitation, but we know he had his own big injury just at the end of December, which isn't that long ago, and he's probably going to be out or limited a lot longer than Travis Etienne is going to be, and they don't have much in terms of a running back room. They have a whole bunch of question marks, really, with Raquel Armstead, Mekhi Sargent, guys like that. Do you think that James Robinson, let's say he does come back healthy as well, do you think he's going to eat in a lot to that? Or do you think Travis Etienne and he are going to have separate roles in that offense?
I do think that they would share the backfield pretty much. The nice thing, though, is when you look at what Travis Etienne does best, he is a pass catcher. And while I expect this team to make a little bit of an improvement from last season, where they were league worst 14.9 points, 3 wins overall in the NFL, I don't expect them to suddenly become a playoff team. I expect them to improve a little bit, but realistically, there's still a team that's going to be playing from behind a lot, which bodes very well for Travis Etienne's profile, that he should be that pass catching third down back machine in Jacksonville. Now, you talked about James Robinson and his late season injury. The reports that I've read is that he had a very clear cut of his Achilles. So when you hear about guys like Cam Akers who were able to come back in 6 months, that was a partial tear and he was able to come back. From what I've been reading, it doesn't sound like James Robinson is going to be ready for week 1. So that's kind of what I like about Travis Etienne as well, is that he is going to have the opportunity in week 1 to secure a very big role for himself. And while James Robinson is a very talented guy and he can come back and siphon some of those carries away, I don't think that it's going to be anything substantial. I think that Travis Etienne, with that first round draft capital, with the history with Trevor Lawrence, is still going to be the main guy over there. And I think James Robinson is just going to be used as an early down and change of pace guy.
Yeah, and with the whole mess of the season that the Jaguars had last year, just with the turmoil from the hiring of Urban Meyer through that whole fiasco, Doug Peterson's going to bring some stability, if nothing else, to that offense, to that team. We know he likes to run the ball. And as you mentioned, Etienne has that familiarity with Trevor Lawrence. They were at Clemson together. You look over the course of his career, he didn't play a whole lot his freshman year, but he had 102 receptions over the course of his college career, which is a huge thing for a young quarterback to have that familiarity and then also just know what each other thinks as far as dumping the ball off, where they're going to go with it. And I like it, but I also feel like they almost have to bring someone else in as a third running back right now. And does that scare you off at all, thinking the draft coming up and then some of those older free agents out there? Does that bother you at all?
I think they might bring in somebody, but I don't think it's going to be anybody of major consequence. I don't think they're going to be reaching for Hall or Spiller or Walker. I think they'd bring somebody down or bring somebody in that can just take over James Robinson's role while he is out. But I think that when you look at the talent that Travis Etienne has, it's not something that we've seen Doug Peterson have before. And a lot of people are quick to point to Doug Peterson's history with Miles Sanders and how he didn't feed Miles Sanders. But I don't think Miles Sanders is anywhere near the player that Travis Etienne is. So I think that one big thing is that they need to really rewind the damage that Urban Meyer did to Trevor Lawrence last year. And why not do that by hooking him up consistently with his favorite college from Target? I think that's a really good way to help his development, is to make sure that he nurtures that chemistry that he has with Travis Etienne. So I'm just expecting that to be the engine that runs the Jaguars offense next year. And one other thing I want to point out too, is I think that there's so many red flags that are things that I typically hear a running back on a bad team and you don't want anything to do with that. You hear a guy coming off an injury and you don't want anything to do with that. You hear a guy that's playing on an offense with a rookie quarterback that underperformed. And I understand all of these red flags, but they aren't things that I really concerned about. So I'm just looking at that as an opportunity to push his draft value down and give me the opportunity to acquire even more. We've seen Christian McCaffrey be an absolute stud on a terrible offense. We saw it last year with DeAndre Swift. And I think that when you look at Travis Etienne's profile, he fits in right in with those guys. And regardless of how well the Jacksonville Jaguars do, Travis Etienne is still going to be a very good fantasy football asset.
Yeah, and they're not the same player at all, but players splitting carries with someone else and just being in that receiving role, if that does end up being his primary role. We've seen guys like Darren Sproles, who aren't nearly the running back like a Travis Etienne, have successful careers just being a third down role guy for several years there. He did with the Chargers, then he did with New Orleans. Etienne, to your point, better running back and to be in a better situation, just an all-around better runner too. So if you're looking at that as a floor in a situation where they are going to have to throw the ball a lot, they have that division that's just a mushy mess right now, but they're going to be playing the AFC West this year too. And those teams are going to be putting up points on Jacksonville where they're just going to have to chuck the ball in some of these games. Are they going to be able to protect Trevor Lawrence and get the ball downfield to Christian Kirk and that whole slew of wide receivers? Or is it going to be something where I'm going to dump the ball off here to Etienne just because he needs that safety valve? It's going to be interesting. And I do think Etienne can benefit a lot from those situations.
I just see so much of the comps this year for Travis Etienne to what we saw last season with DeAndre Swift, where there isn't a clear-cut wide receiver one on this team. And I think that there's a very good opportunity for Travis Etienne to step into 80 to 100 targets. And if you can get that in the fourth, fifth, or sixth round of your fantasy football draft, that's just an absolute steal. So obviously the concern is there with his injury, but I'm betting on modern medicine and I'm betting on him to fully recover.
Looking at the draft, and we don't know landing spots here, most people have Breece Hall, who isn't even on a team yet, ahead of Travis Etienne. Is that how you're feeling about going into the season too, or would you rather take Etienne with the known situation right now?
I think that people are just getting a little bit carried away with Breece Hall, and it's because it happens every single year. We get rookie fever. We get excited about what could this be? Maybe this guy could be anything. He could be as good as Travis Etienne. And I think that people are just getting a little bit carried away. I'm not a hardcore film grinder or a college guy, but I look at what these guys do. I look at their profiles. I look at a little bit of tape here and there, and I didn't see anything that really separated Breece Hall from Isaiah Spiller or Kenneth Walker. I have all those guys tiered similarly. And I think because of Najee Harris last year and because of Jonathan Taylor 2 years ago, people are just getting really excited about the RB1 in the draft class. But I don't know if he should be ranked ahead of Travis Etienne right now. But at the same time, we haven't seen either of these guys take a snap on an NFL field yet. So there's risk with both of them.
I know you're big into those best ball drafts too, like over on Underdog Fantasy. Where do you see Travis Etienne going? And is he still a value at this point because he's coming off of the injury?
So right now, Underdog's ADP is broken. I don't know if you've seen this or not. For whatever reason,
Yeah.
it hasn't updated in the last month. So that does make it kind of tough. But when that ADP was first pushed out there, Travis Etienne was the RB19. And that's typically where he's getting drafted, is in the
Okay.
fourth and fifth round. So I have irresponsible amount of exposure on Travis Etienne right now because he's a guy that I think as we get closer to the season, it's going to take one clip to come out in training camp of him doing something spectacular, just spinning off of a tackle, hurdling somebody, whatever it may be. As soon as we get that one clip that shows that he is 100% healthy, he's going to shoot up into the back end of the second round. So right now, I'm acquiring as much as I can, knowing that he's at a suppressed value. And then once he does creep up into that 2-3 turn, I'll probably pump the brakes and stop drafting him right now. But where he's going now in the fourth and fifth round, I'm trying to acquire as much of him as I can.
Yeah, and he's going to be having a full year of recovery coming up right around the time of the preseason because that's when he got hurt. So I do think that probably it was a little bit helpful, actually. And I think he made some of those comments when they asked him about the missed season and how it affected him. But if there's ever a season to miss, maybe this would be the one. Not having to go through some of that just negativity and mess that Urban Meyer brought while being able to rehab and stay fresh. He's not going to have to, probably relearn a complete new playbook in the same fashion that someone who had been there all year last year would. Not that necessarily that playbook would do you a whole lot of good seeing how the Jaguars went under Urban Meyer, but it does feel like he really is a true rookie, that he's going to be in his first NFL regular season game, but he's going to have that familiarity with, I've been able to rehab, my body's feeling good. I know Trevor Lawrence and what he wants from me and how to handle him. It does feel like he's a little bit lower than he should be at this point. So I love that you brought him up to discuss.
And for a lot of the things that we've talked about on this show in the last 15 minutes or so are also great reasons to go out and acquire Trevor Lawrence right now. Last year,
Yeah.
I don't say this often, but I think you could just completely throw away last year. Everything we saw from Trevor Lawrence, everything we saw from the Jaguars, put some sort of water into it and factor it in your analysis. But at the end of the day, it was just such a crapshoot last year in Jacksonville that you can just throw everything away. James Robinson was playing phenomenal football and got inexplicably benched by Urban Meyer in the middle of the season. We went through, what was it, a 9-week stretch where Trevor Lawrence didn't throw a single touchdown. Abysmal last year in Jacksonville. And seeing what Doug Peterson was able to do with Carson Wentz, who had a very similar skill set to Trevor Lawrence, is obviously better in just about every single facet, but they're very similar players when you look at how they play on the field. I think that it's just a match made in heaven. So I'm expecting nothing huge. I don't think that the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to find their way back in the AFC Championship, but I think this is a team that could surprise some people and end up with 6 to 8 wins this year.
Yeah, and historically, quarterbacks, we've gotten spoiled over the past 10 years or so, it seems, with some of these players coming in their first year. Historically, quarterbacks that even start their first year aren't just going to come out of the gates being amazing. And in fantasy football, it seems like we've lost sight of that. Maybe this last draft class in 2021 will bring us back to reality a little bit with so many of those big name quarterbacks taken early. And most of them just didn't do much of anything for a variety of reasons. And I think sometimes we need to take that longer view instead of that immediately. All right, what did you do for me last season? Am I on you or am I off you? And there isn't a whole lot of nuance out there, it seems. So that's a good reminder.
And there's a lot more to the story, but I just tweeted it out recently. If you look at Peyton Manning's stats from his rookie year and Trevor Lawrence's stats from his rookie year, they are almost identical. Now, Peyton Manning threw a few more touches, or touchdowns. And I mean, the touchdown total for Trevor Lawrence was just hilariously awful last year. But when the underlying metrics, Peyton Manning and Trevor Lawrence had pretty similar rookie seasons, and we all know how Peyton Manning went to go
Yep.
finish the rest of his career. Not saying that should be what's expected for Trevor Lawrence, but like you said, people just get way too overreactive when it comes to how a rookie season shakes out nowadays.
All right. We are going to move from the football field to the 40 in here. I want to thank everyone who's watching, listening, however you're getting this. Make sure you hit the like button if you like this sort of information, the football, and then the paranormal that we're going to get in here. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already. That way you're aware of when we're dropping new content here. And Dave, you, as far as your paranormal sort of story, you had a sort of ghost haunting type of story to go over today.
Yeah, it's something that I've never dove too deeply into, but when I was in 8th grade, we took a class trip to St. Augustine, Florida. Let me rewind really quickly. The grade school that I went to, I had 5 kids in my graduating 8th grade class. Most people go to Washington, D.C., one of those typical things. Our teacher said, "Hey, I got a beach house in Florida. Let's all go do that." So me and my 4 classmates all flew to St. Augustine, Florida right before we graduated 8th grade. And while we were down there, we did a ghost tour. And you can probably corroborate this. Maybe it was just what I was told at the time, but we were told that St. Augustine, Florida was one of the most haunted cities in the United States. So we go on this late night ghost tour. And at the time, I didn't really have any expectations. We're just walking around, but my mom sent me with a disposable camera. So while we're there, we're walking through the graveyard and taking different pictures. We passed what was one of the oldest schools in America. And I took a picture of the school and didn't think anything twice of it. And then we come home from the trip. And once I get these pictures developed, and this was a disposable camera, one of those yellow Kodak cameras, when we got the pictures developed, there were little orbs in all of the pictures that I thought were interesting. And the guy that was giving us the ghost tour said that that was something to be expected. But what really shook me was the picture that I had taken of the school up in the very top window of the school. It's one of the canopied, I don't know what you call it, but it's one of those, the top window of the school. There's a very small window up there. And there was a girl's face in this picture, clear as day. Now, when you asked me to come on this show, I was hoping that I'd be able to find this picture. I used to have it sitting in a book with a bunch of other pictures from my childhood. Thought it might be at home, so I actually called up my mom and I asked her to go through some of my old stuff and find this, and she wasn't able to. But that scared me so much. I showed all of my friends that we went on that trip with, and sure enough, there was a girl's face clear as day in that window of the school.
Now, did it look like it was transparent see-through, or did it look like an actual physical person up in that window?
It looked like an antique sort of picture where it was there wasn't a lot of color to it and it was a little bit transparent, but all you could see was the face. You couldn't see anything else, the neck, shoulders, or anything. It was just like it looked like an opaque picture of a face was just stuck directly onto the window.
Oh, that's crazy. The orbs, that's a common thing that people talk about in terms of energy and spirits of that, and like moving around supposedly haunted places. And St. Augustine is one of the oldest places in the country, too. I mean, that was founded back in like 1565. People started settling there. So lots of stuff has happened in that land over time, and a lot of not good stuff, too, in that part of the country. But man, that the face up in the school like that, as a kid, that'd shake me as an adult. I can only imagine when you pick that up from pharmacy or wherever you got that stuff taken care of back then. That's nuts.
And none of us saw it at the time. We just you couldn't see much. We were walking around. It was late at night. It was pretty dark out. Flashlights with us. But really, I mean, what we were told was just take as many pictures as you can because you're going to see some cool stuff on film. And that's what we did. Use an entire roll of camera on this tour late at night. Nobody saw any face up in the school at the time. But like I said, it was pretty wild to go back and look at those developed pictures and see them then.
Did anyone else on your trip with your small class there get anything else crazy like that, or did they get orbs as well in any of their photos?
Yeah, just orbs, and then I don't know what you'd call them. The ones that weren't orbs, there was when you take a picture and you're moving the camera quickly and you can see like a light trail in the picture.
Yeah.
There are also a lot of those, but what was really weird is nothing else would be moving. So it's not like the camera was moving. You'd see the tombstones and the mausoleums and all that would be perfectly still, but then you would have these little like light tracers shooting through the film. It was very eerie. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. And on the tour itself, we didn't feel anything. We were kids, we were joking around, we were having fun and elbowing each other and roughhousing and not really taking it seriously. But when those pictures came back, we all got a little spooked.
Did the guide or whoever was taking you on this, sort of trip through the cemetery and school and all that, did they have any specific stories of things that had happened there that they referenced that had to do with kids or anything?
I got to be honest, this was over 20 years ago. It was a long time back. I can't even really remember the tour, all that. What I remember, especially, are the pictures that came through after. If you want to, though, I do have one quick, more recent story that I can expand on where we heard a story and had an encounter. This was at the Stanley Hotel in Estes
Oh,
Park,
yeah.
which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And we
Yep.
did the late night adult tour, which started at 11 p.m. And as we were in the room where they were talking about where a lot of the kitchen staff would stay, we're sitting there talking and he's telling us a story about the kitchen staff and how they were mistreated while they were working there. And while he was talking to us, we heard boom, this loud slam, and it was one of the windows was open. And we all got genuinely freaked out by this. And it was a windy night, so you can chalk it up to the wind. But the timing was very coincidental that window slammed shut while he was talking to us about it.
Yeah, that I've heard a lot about that, and you can read stuff online, which is mostly how I take in the information about that ghost stuff. Because podcasts and YouTube videos, they're trying to get a lot of other feelings and stuff out of it. But when people have been writing for years and years just about the things going on there, I would love to go visit there sometime. My wife was into that stuff too, but unfortunately, with the kids, I don't know that we're going to get out there anytime soon until they get a little bit older and can handle it. But yeah, you talk about a place with a long history too, that not nearly as old as St. Augustine. Yeah, that's a great one.
And when we went on that tour, there was actually a family that was touring with us that were all decked out in the Shining outfits. They had
No.
twin girls that were dressed just like the girls from The Shining. Mom and dad were dressed just like Jack Nicholas. That was a fun tour. Would highly recommend that if you ever make it out to Colorado.
All right, Dave, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing those stories with me today. Again, I love the stuff that you're doing over there on Twitter and TikTok through your. It isn't just football with Dave, guys. Dave likes to have fun on Twitter. He's informative. He's a great analyst, but you also got to know when he's having some fun because he's good at getting some jokes in there when he feels it. So go give him a follow if you haven't. You're going to find more of that on Twitter than on TikTok, of course, because TikTok really doesn't have as much of that interactive feature per se. But Dave, why don't you let everyone know where to find you again?
Yeah, real easily. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. That's Kluge. And then all of my written and video work can be found at footballguys.com. We're going to be rolling out the new season where you can purchase that just within the next week or so here. So be sure to check that out. We're actually changing up all of our subscription tiers this year. We're adding a Discord where you can hop in a chat room with me and Joe Bryant, and Sigmund Bloom, and Jeff Bell, and all those guys. Matt Waldman giving you fantastic information in season. So check that out over at footballguys.com.
All right. Thank you again for coming on to share that with me. And remember, whether you're watching or listening, if you are interested in the Enfield Poltergeist or Travis Etienne, we are going to have you covered here on Playernormal Activity. We'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching. If you'd like more great fantasy football content like this, please click the link down below here.